Hey there, welcome to the First Look. Thanks for being here this week. In my house, just because I'm being lazy today and not walking around. So, this coming week, we're kind of continuing, but I did want to say something about the week we just had of the presentation of the Lord. They did the worship and music folks did a wonderful job doing all of that. Stephen and the choir and the folks who set up communion. It was a really wonderful service. And so if you didn't have a chance to be there, obviously there's a recording, so you can go and see that on our YouTube. But we had the lights and the processional and communion and some beautiful music. And it was really just a nice service. And so I'm grateful to everybody who put that together. So the lectionary kind of keeps going, and where we were before we kind of paused for a second to do that was we were kind of doing Corinthians, 1 Corinthians. So we're going to hop back on to that. And so the context of this week is kind of a few things that you should sort of be aware of. The first one being we are ordaining and installing officers, elders, and deacons. And I always like that service because I like the collective kind of witness of it, because it's sort of the culmination of this nominating process that we go through. And you heard me kind of talk about that, and I like that process and what it says about us and what we can do together. And the ordination and installation of folks is kind of the last piece of that, us all coming together and saying out loud, not only do we hear and affirm what they are saying yes to, but that we're going to support them and care about them. And we use some of the language that we use in baptism of that kind of mutual support. And that's, I think, a special part of the way we do that. Because you're the ones choosing those people. You choose the committee that chooses the folks that are then elected by the congregation. And I like that process. I like the way that works. So there's that element of the service. There's also, it's Scout Sunday, which kind of comes around every year right around the Super Bowl. So we incorporate the Scouts into that. And they do like kind of a special announcement and some language and liturgy and that kind of thing. So it's nice to be able to have kind of a mission of the church represented in the service, and then how that's kind of connected with officers, just as a nice sort of layering effect of what the worship service can look like. And this week is kind of introspective. If the passage we're going to read is Paul kind of thinking out loud about who he is and what he cares about. And it's one of those texts that kind of accomplishes two things. First, it gives us a really core idea around the theology of Christology, meaning like the theology of Christ and who, Messiah, salvation, that kind of thing. And it kind of gives us an understanding of like what all that kind of looks like with resurrection, and so there's a lot of language around that. But then there's also this kind of, again, this sort of out loud conversation that Paul is having with himself about who he is in comparison to the other apostles, and then what he's tried to do as a result of how he feels about himself. That's kind of what you see happen in this text. So let me read it to you, and since I can have it here in front of me, and we can kind of go through it. So this is 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and it's 1 through 11. Okay. 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 11. Now I will remind you, brothers and sisters, of the good news that I proclaimed to you, which you in turn received, and which you also stand, through which you also are being saved, if you hold firmly to the message that I proclaimed to you, unless you have come to believe in vain. So I like that he kind of starts off with a cry to be genuine, to say what you mean, to live into that, and to do so with some kind of integrity. I like that he kind of starts with that. So, for I handed on to you as of first importance what I in turn have received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, which is Simon, Peter, okay, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at one time, most of them who are still alive, though some have died. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Okay, pausing there. So I think it's always important for us to remember that at the time, like when we're reading something that seems kind of obvious and bedrock, that at some point it was not obvious and bedrock, and that Paul was stating it as kind of a way of almost like a miniature creed, the way that we would say a creed in the every week in worship. He's kind of stating that for the people. He's trying to make sure that their theology is centered on what he says, not what anyone else might say. Like, hey, let me remind you what the nature of the resurrection is, and what that means for us, right? Like, what's the cause and effect? Because again, one of the things you see often in the letters of Paul, but also other folks who kind of come after Paul, either those who take on Paul's name and write in Paul's name, or letters like of Peter, for instance. The same Peter, Cephas, that's named here. In those letters, you have a lot of defense of right theology, and they're doing that because they don't have texts or a denomination, or they don't have a creed, or they don't, those things don't exist in the way that they do now, or have, for the last 1,000 years. We have written over and over and over again what it is that we believe, and we have, try to create a core of that. And so Paul is doing that for the people of Corinth. And then he's going to move into basically his authority. Like, how could I tell you these things? So it's sort of like a proof. He's going to say what's true, and then he's going to prove why it is that he is someone to listen to, because of his status. Like, here's my status, here's what's true, let me be upfront about that, but then here's why I believe that I am the person to speak to this. Let's see. Last of all, verse 8. Last of all, as to one untimely born, meaning himself, he appeared also to me. For I am the least of the apostles, unfit to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. So obviously you remember Saul to Paul, and that the confrontation, I guess, revelation that he has on the road, and the blinding and the, so that's the reference, obviously. Okay. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace toward me has not been in vain. On the contrary, okay, and then he's going to kind of prove, all right, this is who I am. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. So there's a little bit of like Paul's healthy ego, while at the same time being self-deprecating. Pointing to the fact that it's not like, oh, it's not my goodness or my glory that got me here. It's the fact that like this is God working through me. Whether then it was I or they, so we proclaim, and so you have come to believe. Meaning, you can come to believe because of the apostles, because of the 12, or because of me, and he's trying to make sure that they know that that's one and the same. That I am the natural continuation of that work. So, this text, I'm trying to remember what I called this. I think that my sermon's called something like "We're Working on It," or something like that. Continuing to work on it. And I think where I originally wanted to focus was a little bit more on that last part of the text rather than the first part. Now, of course, the first part's important. Anytime we have a chance to talk about resurrection and our understanding of salvation, and that's more than worth our time. But I think that being said, how is it that we kind of where is the place where we enter into this text? And for me, it's Paul working through who he is and his status, I guess, in terms of, and his rightful place in doing this work. And I think that the piece of this that's really important for me, just as a person, is trying to work through the reality of who I am with any kind of integrity. So you look at your life, you look at how that is played out from your youth through your adulthood, and you kind of start to, if you're like me, examine and re-examine what your life has been like. And you see Paul doing that very clearly. He's clearly still trying to process and work out, like, this is who I was. Because it wasn't like, oh, I had an opposing opinion. He was killing Christians. And now he's doing what he's doing. And so the weight of that, I think, is heavy. But also, imagine if you knew that about Paul, right? Think about someone in your life that you think of as just a villain, right? You have someone in your mind. Maybe it's a public figure, or maybe it's someone in your life that you've had trouble with. Now think about that person who has proven themselves to not have your best interests at heart, okay? Or to not have the public's interest at heart. Some people might see them as good, right? A lot of people cheered on Saul whenever he was doing what he was doing. And some people may like the person who you're thinking of in your personal life who never seems to have your best interest at heart. And now you have to somehow get yourself to trust that person. And not just trust them like with your money or something, but trust them with your heart, soul, and your, how you see God. How people's window into how they saw God was coming through Paul, who he was. And he's trying to do two things at once. Enter into that conversation with some level of humility. I'm not fit to do this work. But then, at the same time, follow that up with, but I've worked really hard. I've worked hard to be the person that you see now. And I think, it has this passage for me has a lot to do with thinking about how trust is earned. What would that person that you, again, that kind of villain in your mind, either the one in the public eye or the one in your personal life, what would that person have to do? How often or to what degree would they have to turn things around for you to feel like I could trust them? And I think the thing about Paul is that whoever you have in your mind as either that public villain or private in your life villain, it seems so unlikely that they would ever turn around. That even if they did, they said all the right things, they did all the right things for a while, you would still have trouble believing it because it would seem like maybe it was like a trick or something. Like it was like a double cross. That at any time they were going to go like, gotcha, and then do what they originally did. And some of it's because we have a hard time believing that people can change. That fundamentally they stay the same. And because we know that people fundamentally stay the same, we will change our opinion of them even when they don't deserve it, because if it is convenient for us. You see that happen often, especially like if you have like a public figure, like say some artist or actor or something that you like. You've liked them your whole life, and then all of a sudden they do something illegal or wrong or immoral or unethical or something. You kind of have two choices. You either just kind of cancel them from your life, or you kind of make some excuse for their behavior. Well, it's okay because, and the only reason you're doing that is because you like them. That kind of complicated reality, I think, is certainly here in Paul's life, and I think he understands that that's true. And he's trying, I think, genuinely to want to be upfront about who he has been, not run from it, but also, not shy away from trying to be honest about what he's tried to do to rectify that. And people in your life who have done that. Maybe they have been addicted to something, or just have kind of made a lot of mistakes over and over again. Call it the immaturity of youth, or call it just and like I said, addiction or something. Any of those things. And then they do the hard work of trying to make amends. Like they go through all those kinds of steps. Well, I think that's kind of where Paul has been. It was like, I didn't know any better. Or even if I did know better, it was more advantageous for me to be on this other side. And now I'm going to live my life this way. And I think that's admirable, but you can start to see the kind of difficulty of it. It's trusting someone who has proven themselves to be something else to you is a really difficult thing. And I honestly don't know who it's harder for. I don't know if it's harder for you, who has to try to work out whether you can trust them or not, or the person who has taken your trust, and now they're trying to get it back. But that's, I think, a big part of where we see this text. And I think that the reason I like the way that it's kind of written is that Paul does this whole setup of trying to describe salvation and grace and Jesus. And then, goes through that kind of study of salvation, and then goes through then kind of a self-study of who he is and what he needs from you, basically, which is, I need your grace as well. I needed God's grace. I also need yours. And that those two have to go hand in hand. That how we experience the grace of God also has to be the way we experience how we give grace to other people, or how we receive grace from other people. But the person has to ask for it. Sometimes we get into a situation where we make excuses for other people's behavior, and we will say, well, that they deserve some grace. Are they asking for grace? We want them to have it, but are they asking for it? Are they trying to make amends? Are they working on, how do I gain your trust again? Are they apologizing to the people they have wronged? Are they, what evidence is there that they agree with you? I've seen that happen many times, where someone has tried to convince me, oh, we should forgive so and so. They're not coming to me. They're not coming to you and saying, I have erred. I need to be held accountable. I need, that's a different conversation. People who are willing to be held accountable for something, and who are actively seeking your forgiveness, that's a different conversation than you pointing to someone who continues to do the wrong thing and continues to cause more and more separation between the people around them. They're not asking for grace. You're asking to be let off the hook for caring for them and not be held responsible for what they do. You need an excuse to continue to believe in them, and you want me to join you in that. And that's, that's a harder pill to swallow. And I don't know that that's really the healthy way to go about it. But I think what this passage can inspire us towards is recognizing the difference between genuinely working out what it means to be reconciled to one another and what doesn't equal that. And I think that's a pretty pivotal pivotal thing to understand when it comes to how we reconcile with one another. And there's a lot of examples we could give, but I think that the best ones for you are probably ones that are personal. Distrust can happen very quickly, and trust is earned over time. But it has to be something that you are engaged in, right? It's not given to someone who doesn't want it. And I think that that's an important distinction. So this is one of those weeks, I think, where we're kind of working out a kind of a core idea, a core Christian idea. And how you end up applying that, I think, is more up to you. I don't know that this necessarily speaks to one particular event or thing in life, but I think is a way of understanding how to approach life or how to approach people in faith, right? This is I think a specific Christian concept of the nature of grace and reconciliation. And I think that otherwise we cheapen it when there's no expectation of a mutual desire to see that happen. So I don't know exactly how that manifests itself, but that's the idea that I had whenever I was kind of putting these together and giving the title and that kind of thing. So my hope is that you'll think about what that means for you, how you see this idea kind of played out in your own life, and maybe where you need to work on it. And when I say work on it, I mean, where are you hoping that people will just forgive you without you actually doing anything to signal to them that you're ready to receive that grace? Because part of receiving grace means doing something that actually shows the other person that you're ready for it. Meaning, so like for example, maybe you've done something wrong to somebody else and you're like, you know what, they won't get over it. I have apologized, but they won't get over it. And maybe they won't. But instead of looking at them and saying, why can't you release me from this place you've put me in, or distance you've created, what else do I need to do to show you that I'm doing this genuinely? And that takes some reflection, and that's what I think I think that we need to be sort of talking about. That's where at least the scripture I think is leading me. So, okay, that's what I have for this week. I don't know exactly where that goes, but that's a starter. Hopefully that gets something kind of moving in your mind. So my gut says I'll probably relate that somehow to our ordination installation of folks. So we'll see where I end up. Okay. Thank you for doing this with me. Thanks for thinking through all that with me. Thanks for being the people that listened to me for this long. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time for another First Look. Take care.